Good morning. Before we jump in the message, a little family business. I want to personally invite you this afternoon to come between 4 and 6 our open house. I know many of you have already been at Locust Street, but there is so much to thank God for, and so we really want you to be a part of that event. It's going to be a great event, and so I hope you'll be there. Also, a little bit closer to my family, you're my church family, but actually my mom and dad are here today, and they're sitting on the front row. They wanted to see what was going on. You know, moms and dads want to see the space. So they've been praying for us and are glad to be here. And I'm so glad they get to come for a week and experience what's happening here at Grace Church Bethlehem. Well, as I've been thinking about this week, I've been thinking about actually jobs. I wonder what you would say was the best job you ever had. You know, maybe it was your first job. It's like, oh, I did it, I made it. Maybe it's the job where you finally got the salary that you think you deserve. Maybe it is a job where you finally get to do the stuff you want to do. And some of you might say that you're just so glad that you skipped right. You wish you could have skipped right over to grandparenting because that's your favorite job, right? I hear that from you. Well, I heard about a job description this week that went viral, and here it is. The mattress firm actually is accepting applications for paid internships. These are paid, and they're called snooze turns, and this is what they advertised. If your greatest skills include sleeping in, constant napping, and a passion for a good night's rest, we have the internship for you. All right, now how many of you would apply? Go ahead, yeah. Okay, well, don't practice during the sermon today, okay? Don't do that. Well, we have actually spent the last couple weeks looking at how the Good Shepherd actually gives us rest. He's the one who helps us relax. I mean, when we trust the shepherd, we have our needs met. He feeds us and he guides us and he leads us to these comfy beds of grass. But this week we get to the middle verse. And if you understand poetry, you understand that oftentimes the middle verse is where the climax happens, where the tension begins to rise. You know, we love it when the Good Shepherd takes care of us. And we love it when things are easy. But everything is about to change. Someone once told me that in any room that you go into, there are 1/3 of the people in the room who are going through crisis, and that there are 1/3 of the room who are just coming out of crisis, and there are 1/3 of the people in the room that are about to go into crisis. You know, life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? Out of nowhere, life changes. So a diagnosis or a divorce or a dead end, something you didn't expect and something you never wanted, but something happens that shakes you to your core. Something that truly is worthy of your fear. Well, that's where we are in the psalm today. The sheep and the shepherds, there's no more lounging beside still waters or hanging out in the green pastures. They've hit the inevitable valley. The challenge that feels like it's the end. So here's where we are in the psalm. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You know, David, he wrote this psalm, of course, and he had this resume full of sheep experience. I mean, when he wrote that psalm, he remembered way back to his shepherd days, and his sheep were often in danger. There were avalanches and rivers and floods and lions and tigers and bears. Well, not tigers, but lions and bears, right? But David also knew valleys and threats and challenges in his own life. Challenges that he couldn't easily just sweep away or forget about. There were threats on his life when King Saul wanted to take his life. There was adultery with Bathsheba. He had rebellious children. There were traitors in King David's army. But probably there were no more real challenge in his life that was so tangible and real than the moment he faced Goliath. That day, when he was writing that, he had to remember the day he walked into and arrived at the valley of Elah. The war had been raging for days, and day after day, the Philistines were on one side and the Israelites were on the other, and you could literally cut the tension with a knife. And it wouldn't take much to light the dynamite and create this full-fledged battle. But twice a day, Goliath showed up. This big, tall warrior, he would walk down the line between the two armies, and he would mock the Israelites. He would taunt them. He would scream insults at them. And what he wanted was one man to take him on. And that man-to-man battle would solve the score between the two nations. There would be one winner and one loser. There would be one slave and one master. But no one would take Goliath up on it. Every Israelite was afraid of Goliath. He had this bronze helmet on his head, and he had 5,000 shekels worth of armor. He could twirl his baton like a spear. He could twirl his spear like a baton. And that spear probably weighed more than David did. No one was willing to take him on. Not King Saul, not David's brothers, no one. Well, while all that was going on in the valley, David had been off watching the family sheep. But his dad said, hey, take the day off, go down and see your soldier brothers and take them some food and provisions. Well, when David got there, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. And he stepped right in. And this is what he said to the king. David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of Goliath. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, you are not able to go out against this Philistine to fight with him, for you're but a youth. And he has been a man of war from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and when there came a lion or a bear and they tried to take a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he rose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. You know, there's some important principles about the Goliaths that you and I face. And we literally see them acted out in David's life and in his writing of this 23rd Psalm. You know, if you've got a Bible, you might want to open up, or you're on your phone, you might want to open up. We'll have it on the screen. But if you've got a way to do this, you might want to circle a few words to help you get these principles. Now, every time we're going to read through these verses, we're going to read through the verse a couple times, and every time we do that, there's going to be a certain word or words that is in capital letters. So when you say it, we're going to read it together, but when you get to the capital letters, I want you to say it loud. We want to emphasize those. Got it? All right, let's start with this one. Ready? Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. You know, that simple two-word phrase really gives us the first principle, the first truth. Even though I walk. You know this, it's just part of the human experience to walk through valleys. You know, David has no illusion that he can kind of avoid the valleys of life or that they're optional. You will face valleys and Goliaths in your life. You know, Jesus told the same thing to his disciples in the book of John. He said, you will have troubles. He didn't say you might have troubles. He said, you will have troubles. And we know that's true. We don't know exactly what's around the corner next week or next year, but we know that there are game changers that happen, like a bad diagnosis, like losing your parent, like your marriage coming unraveled. Those things happen. Like David, we know we will face Goliaths in our life. When I was working on my very first wedding as a brand new pastor, long before I was married or even understood what these words meant, I came across them written actually by one of the former archbishops of Canterbury, words he spoke during a wedding. This is what he said to a couple as they were standing before him. He said, we all wish you happiness, but our wishes cannot give it. You cannot choose what changes and chances are to befall you in the coming years, but you can choose the way in which you meet them. You know, David is showing you and me the way to meet our valleys. So here's the next phrase. Let's read it again. Ready? Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. You know, those Philistines and those Israelites, they were on that field faced off for weeks. But no one dared move. No one dared walk into the valley. But there David was, this young shepherd, this inexperienced soldier. He went straight in and he kneeled by the brook in the middle of two powerful armies. And he picked up 5 smooth stones. You know, David walked into the valley ready to face Goliath. Now, how did he do that? Well, his mind was not on Goliath. It was on God. He was not Goliath dominated, he was God dominated. See, David said and he believed that the battle was God's, so it was done. It was over. It was won. When David met that threat, he walked. He wasn't paralyzed. He knew what he needed to overcome. He was afraid. He heard all these voices, but he had God. God was with him. Everybody else on the field was thinking about Goliath, but David was thinking about God. Eugene Peterson says, talking about this scripture, he said, reality is made up mostly of what we can't see. See, David knew that. With God present, death is only a shadow. Death has no power. The challenge or the giant or the valley can't overcome David. Goliath can't overcome David. So David sees Goliath, but he turns his focus on God. You know, when you face your valley, when you face your Goliath, you have to walk. When Goliaths come to us, we can't simply turn, we can't simply ignore, we can't run away. We have to keep moving. You know, when you and I face our Goliaths, we have to be God thinkers, not Goliath thinkers. One of the most interesting parts of the David and Goliath story for me is that no one believed that David could beat Goliath. Their eyes were still on Goliath. They were on the valley, and they were so overcome by their own fear that they didn't hear what David was saying. They didn't remember that the power of God was with them. Now, the people around him thought they could help David. So Saul gave David his armor, and many other people gave David their doubts and their advice. And you know, at first, David listened. He tried on Saul's fancy, heavy, oversized armor. I mean, he thought it could help, but it didn't. He couldn't walk right in it. It wasn't his. Instead of helping him, it paralyzed him. So David walked away from all of it. He walked away from the armor and he walked away from the advice. And when he got his eyes back on God's power, it changed the playing field. He dropped the armor, he went to the creek, he picked up those stones, and he was ready. Now back to the 23rd Psalm. Let's do it again. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. You know, God is with you through the valley. And when shepherds, often when they get to the valley, it's usually a really narrow and a rugged and usually a dangerous path. But there's only one way to go. You have to go through it. And when you go through it, you meet God in a very different way. When you're in the valley, when you're afraid, and when you're out of control, you begin to see that God is in control. Your senses get sharpened, they're acute, and frankly, you get desperate for God to be present in your life. You realize that he's in your life. You know, when you're in the grassy green pastures, it is so easy to talk about God. But when you're in the valley, all you can do is cling to God. In the valley, you experience things that you will never experience anywhere else. Did you notice that in the psalm, David actually changes the way he talks about God at this point of the psalm? He goes from God is he, third person, to God is you. You, God. David tells God, you are with me. See, when we're in the valley, things get personal. Our relationship with God changes, and we experience God in such a more intimate way. Now, sometimes we start out in the valley and we feel like God is totally absent. But often, after time, we begin to understand that God has been with us the whole time. He's been with us even in the valley. We know he's with us and he's ready to comfort us, ready to meet us in our fears and our challenges. You know, when David walks into the valley and through the valley, he goes into it very deliberate and confident. When he approaches Goliath, who is laughing at him, this is what he says. He says, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, very graphic, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves, not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. You know, David went into that battle looking to God for his help. He knew that when he won, that God would get the credit and that God would get the glory. See, for David, Goliath was simply a means to an end to bring about God's glory. David's win would accomplish God's task. And that allowed him to walk into and right through the valley. You know, no one expected David to win. It was really a bit absurd to think that this shepherd boy with a slingshot was going to take on this Philistine with all of his modern equipment. They expected him to lose. So if he won, it had to be God. It had to be God. God would get the glory, and everyone would know it. See, when you walk through the valley, you can give God glory. Your experience that you have can point to God's goodness and his faithfulness. See, David said all would know that it was God who had won the battle. And friends, our neighbors and our colleagues and our family members, they watch us when we face our own challenges. And they want to know how we're going to hold up. They want to know if we're still going to trust God. And when we do, we give God glory. And we point other people to him. Now, I know that some of you are not tracking with what I just said. I think some of you might be thinking that today that there are times that you've had in your life when the Goliath actually wins. When Goliath overwhelms you. The challenge doesn't end the way David's did. In fact, the challenge ends badly. We fail. The fear takes control. Our bodies fail us. But friends, the way we win, or the way we fail, the way we rejoice, or the way we grieve, even the way we live or die, can still give God glory. You know, when you walk through the valley, no matter how it turns out, you are probably going to get the chance to show others the way. See, because of what you experience, you're going to get to point people. Once you've faced your Goliath, you can be uniquely walk with someone who is facing that same Goliath. And you get to remind that person that God is with them. No matter how it ends, God hasn't abandoned them. God hasn't forsaken them. And I've watched this so beautifully done in our congregation. There are women who have had miscarriages, and they are walking with another woman who has had a miscarriage. There are ones of you who've lost your parent or your child, and you walk with those who've had that loss. I've watched those with cancer walk with others who have cancer. I've watched those who are addicted walk with others who are addicted. David got through the valley, and you can get through the valley only when you know God is with you. And sometimes it takes a person beside you to remind you that God is with you. Here's another part of the psalm. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You know, David knew exactly what he was talking about when he mentioned the rod and the staff. He knew what those were for. He knew that unlike other animals who could bite or who could run fast, he knew that sheep, they really had no way to protect themselves. And that's why they needed a shepherd. And those shepherds' weapons were there to help. The shepherd's rod was this weapon against any dangerous threat to a sheep. And the staff was this guiding stick to help the sheep stay on the path. It was the rod and the staff together that did the job. But of course, the rod and the staff were only helpful if they were held by the shepherd. It was the shepherd using the rod and the staff that gave the sheep exactly what they needed. David knew this. David knew that it was God being with him that was the answer to walking through the valley. You know, back in the 1992 Olympics, everyone expected that Derek Redmond would win the 400-meter race. See, here's the background. 4 years before, Derek had to withdraw from the race at the very last minute because he had this injury. But he'd fought back. 5 operations, physical therapy, countless hours. 4 years of training had him now again the favorite to win. He raced the fastest time on his first round. And then he won his quarterfinal heat. And now the finals. It was his time. But about 150 meters into the race, his hamstring tore. And he fell to the ground. During the race, this was still happening. The medics, of course, rushed onto the track, and what they were hoping to do was get him off the track so he wouldn't be in the way, and they could get him some help. But Derek knew he had to finish. So he jumped up, and he started hobbling towards the finish line. He knew he wouldn't win, but he would finish. Derek's dad was in the stands, very top of the stands, and when he saw what happened to his son, he fought his way out of the stands, down onto the track. He fought his way through the security, all the way to beside his son. And at first, Derek thought his dad was trying to pull him off the track, but his dad put his arm around his waist. He put Derek's arm around his neck, and they hobbled together all the way to the finish. And just before the tape, Jim Redmond let his son go, and Derek finished the race to a standing ovation of 65,000 people. He finished. You know, no matter what your valley is today, you are not alone. You know, God himself left the stands of heaven, and he fought through the sin, and he fought through the brokenness of this world to come to you, to walk with you, to lead you through your valley. This morning, my prayer is that you will be able to name your Goliath. No matter what your Goliath is, no matter what you're facing, no matter what valley you're walking through, my prayer is not only that you'll be able to name it, but you'll be able to say again that God is with you, that he's walking with you, that he's hopping with you, if that's where you are today. Now, if today you would like to give God your Goliath, if you would like to thank God for walking with you in your valley, I want to give you a tangible way of expressing that to God. So as we say the entire Psalm 23 together, if you want to do that, I invite you to stand and remain standing as we say the psalm together and as I pray for you in your valley. So let's say this 23rd psalm together, and if you want to respond to God, would you stand? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. God, you love us so much that you sent your son Jesus to be our good shepherd. You give us what we need, and you give us your presence when we face our Goliath and when we walk through our valley. So, Father, by your grace, would you show us how to walk through? Would you show us how to give you glory? no matter what the end is. God, we give you our Goliaths, and we ask that you would give us your grace. And we pray in the name of the Good Shepherd, Jesus Christ, our Lord and our Savior. Amen.